All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us at Empower Missouri's 2026 Legislative Recap. My name's Lucas Caldwell McMillan. I'm going to be the MC and provide a little content, but mostly keep us moving through a lot of information about what happened during the 2026 legislative session, and particularly in our key priority areas. It was a long and busy session, so lots to report on, and happy to have you all here, and thank you for all your support during this legislative session. So our agenda for today, I'm going to give a quick overview of the session, sort of my key themes for the session, some of the highlights and things to look out for, and then we're going to dive into starting with food security, what passed, what didn't pass, move on to community justice, and finish with affordable housing as well. And I'm going to cover, time willing, just a couple of other healthcare related bills, other policy issues that came up, and then go over our upcoming events. All right, so the session ended last Friday, so hot off the presses news as far as that goes. As far as key themes, I picked out four. Others may disagree, but these are my four, starting with the budget. We went into the 2026 legislative session knowing that Missouri's budget was in a tight spot. We had for many years now relied on some federal funds to cover ongoing expenses. And those federal funds are were almost and will be entirely depleted, and were almost entirely depleted at the start of the session, which meant that we knew there were going to be some potentially hard budget decisions. There was a little bit more, hard decisions made during budget negotiations, but the House and Senate did pass the budget on to the governor and largely really kicked the can and didn't make a ton of the hard budget decisions that are going to have to be made as we are totally depleted out of federal funds, and really relied on some one-time state funding sources to sort of paper over some of the harder budget decisions that they're going to have to make eventually. And I think we'll probably see that in the governor's veto, when he makes his veto decisions as well. And this is going to be a theme for 2027 because the federal dollars, which were COVID related dollars and some of the COVID initiatives, are now almost entirely expended. The other theme was that this was a pretty smooth legislative session and definitely a smooth-ish Senate. And so, one measure of that this year, about 100 bills were truly agreed to and finally passed, sent on to the governor. That was more than the prior 2 years. And part of that had to do with that the Senate operated a little bit more all the way till the end of session. And so one of the themes you'll hear as we jump into our priority areas is a few of our priority issues were kind of still up in the air towards the last week of session. And other years where the Senate had basically been entirely gridlocked in those final weeks of session would have meant that those bills didn't move, but actually a fair amount of bills did move last week through the Senate and the House. And it's largely to do with that there was this pretty smooth sense of the Senate this year, which is related to my third bullet there. If you looked at Governor Kehoe's State of the State address 4 months ago, most of the priorities that he emphasized passed this session. I think it's related to a relatively smooth legislative session. Most of those priorities passed. We'll hear, at least in the community justice portion, not necessarily a great priority that we supported, but they were able to get it through the legislative process this year. So, relatively smooth sailing. A lot of bills got passed, still not some towards like the peak amount of legislation. That's one measure of how well the legislature operated. And the last, which is maybe not a theme, but I don't think anyone can talk about the 2026 legislative session without talking about the new tax scheme. And so that goes to the voters. This was one of Governor Kehoe's priority. This is authorizing this everything tax, a tax on everything. Right now, there are state constitutional provisions that restrict what the legislature can tax. And so in a plan to eventually phase out income tax, the state constitutional amendment authorizes the legislature to increase sales taxes and broaden it to everyday services. I think of this, we're an anti-poverty organization. I think of this as really a double whammy of creating a pathway to poverty because one, the phasing out of the income tax means that that's 60% of the state revenue that goes to schools, goes to roads, goes to higher education. These are programs that all Missourians rely on to get a better job, get an education, get job skills and training, get to work, all of those things, their source of funding. The revenue that we rely on will go away with this, be really under threat. And replacing it, the double whammy part of it is that now we're going to be taxing everyday things that these folks use, everyday Missourians use, including things like gas and cars and things like that that people use to get to work. Could certainly tax services, healthcare services, speech therapy. It really broadens and allows taxes on anything the legislature decides. So that really is a double whammy pathway to poverty for some folks and impacts all of us in Missouri. Probably, I think, one of, if not the most consequential things to pass this session. But it just passed to be on the ballot. So this does require a state constitutional amendment. So it'll be on the ballot. Which ballot? We don't know right now. The governor has said that he'll make a decision by Friday. That was the thought. I think he has a little bit more time under the state constitution if it's going to be put on the ballot in August. But we anticipate that we'll know in a week or so whether it'll be on the ballot in August or November. But we will, as Missouri voters, have the final say when it comes to this new tax scheme or tax on everything. And so more to come, certainly from Empower Missouri, because I do think it's one of our key poverty issues that come out of the session, and certainly more to come from other organizations as well. But that was something I wanted to make sure and emphasize because I think it's the more consequential part of the 2026 session. With that, I'm going to turn it over and move on to our three core issue areas. First, starting with food security policies and legislation that passed. Hand it over to Amanda Berry and Christine Woody, our two food security policy managers who did an excellent job this legislative session. Christine, I think you're up first, so I will pass it off to Christine.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lucas. Hope everybody can hear me okay. I would give our food security work for the legislative session a passing grade this year. I think it went fairly well. We were able to get a few of our priorities passed, which I'm very excited to talk more about during this call. We were also able to stop some really bad pieces of legislation from passing, which is a lot of the work that we do. We play defense a lot in the legislature. There were always, of course, some of our priorities that did not move it through the whole process. They got stalled. So we'll talk a little bit about those and talk about what we're going to do looking to regroup for 2027. So the first group of issues I want to work on is really talking about the budget. So while we don't normally do too much work on the budget, we really normally look to our partners at the Missouri Budget Project to lead us and guide us through the whole budget process. There were two things on the budget in the budget process this year that we are really following and working on food security related. The first one comes to Missouri because of the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, H.R. 1, that passed on the federal level, was signed into law by President Trump on July 4th of last year. In that bill, they restructured how the SNAP program, or the food stamps program, how it used to be called, is funded. So in the past, the administrative cost, the way that SNAP was funded, was always covered 50% by the states and 50% by the federal level. The passage of that new bill changed those provisions and said that states had to pay for 75% of the administrative costs to run the SNAP program. And what that means for Missouri is that we would have to come up with an additional $29 million out of our general revenue to continue running our SNAP program as a status quo level. And so at the beginning of the budget process, the departments lay out their budget requests, and the Department of Social Services did include that $29 million. And we talked to a lot of legislators on both sides of the aisle, in the Senate and the House, to encourage them to keep that funding in the budget and how important it was for the SNAP program. And I'm happy to report that that money stayed in the budget and is now at the governor's desk to be signed into law. So that is really great news for the continuation of the SNAP program in the state. The other piece of the budget that we were following is regarding the summer EBT program, or what's now called as the Sun Bucks program. This program became permanent nationwide after COVID. It kind of started as like a pandemic era program that was going to provide some EBT food benefits on cards for kids who are not in school because their schools were closed because of COVID. It then morphed into more of a summer program that provide benefits to kids who would be eligible for free and reduced price school meals during the school year, to provide funds for those families in the summer to help them cover the costs for food, which they were not when they're not receiving the free and reduced price lunch program. So this program provides every eligible child with $40 a month, so $120 for the summer to provide extra funds for their families to cover meals while they're not in school. So similar to how SNAP used to be funded, the Sunbucks program is always split administratively, 50% on the federal level, 50% on the state level. All of the food benefits are from the federal level. So for a state to run this program, they have to come up for 50% of the administrative costs within their general revenue. So again, in this year's Department of Social Services budget, they did include the funding to run this program for the summer of 2027. So next summer. And again, I'm happy to report that that funding stayed in the budget through the entire legislative budget process and is also moving to the governor's desk for signing. So that kind of probably makes you think, this is for 2027. What in the heck for 2026? Where does that come in? So two things I want to highlight about this map for 2026. So yes, the Sunbucks program is happening in Missouri for 2026. That is because of the advocacy that we did last legislative session. So all of the legislative advocacy we did in 2025 is for the summer of 2026 Sunbucks program. And I just want to kind of give you a kind of a glimpse of what this actually means for Missouri. When we ran this program last year in 2025, over 300,000 kids were helped by this program in bringing in over $41 million into the state in food benefits. It is a very big program that helps a lot of kids during the summer. And I am happy to report that it happened in 2026 and will again be happening in 27. And I think this map also underscores the importance of advocacy. So this was not a foregone conclusion that Missouri would run this program. You can see on this map that 11 states are not doing the summer program at all. We could have easily fallen into the camp of a Mississippi or a South Carolina or a Georgia, with Missouri deciding not to invest in this program. But because of the advocacy that folks like you all did in the legislature, as well as with the Department of Social Services through administrative advocacy, we got it through, and it is happening. It's going to help hundreds of thousands of kids this summer and again next summer. So I think this map really does highlight the importance of advocacy and the work that we can do to make things happen in this state. I'm going to now pass it over to Amanda to talk a little bit more about another success that we had this session.
Thanks, Christine. All right, so food as medicine programs target patients with chronic conditions related to poor nutrition by improving access to healthy food. Produce prescriptions are an example of a food as medicine program that you may have heard of before. Many produce prescriptions and medically tailored meal programs funded through grants or philanthropy have been piloted in Missouri, and the results from those pilots have showed that these types of nutrition intervention programs improve health, food security, and drastically reduce medical expenses. Produce prescriptions are literally just that. A patient receives a prescription from their healthcare provider and can then use it to receive free produce. Usually, this has been accompanied with nutrition education. Medically tailored meals, on the other hand, are reserved for patients with more serious health conditions, and the provider prescribes a very specific diet to the patient, and the meals are usually prepared outside of the home and then delivered to the patient. Because these privately funded pilot programs have been so successful in both Missouri and nationally, we were able to use that data and pass our very own food as medicine legislation the first year that it has ever been filed in Missouri. These bills direct the Missouri Department of Social Services to apply for a federal waiver that allows food as medicine services to be paid for by Medicaid funds for Medicaid recipients, thus expanding access to food is medicine. We began the session with one House and two Senate bills. Ultimately, the language from those bills, which were all identical, got added to the healthcare omnibus, which is a really giant bill that has lots of different provisions related to healthcare, all included in one bill. That was House Bill 2372. And it passed on the second to last day of session with a vote of 116 yeas and 21 nays. So that was May 14th. One aspect that I think makes our Food is Medicine Act so special is that the bill language specifically states that when feasible, the Mo Health Net Division will prioritize the inclusion of community-based organizations and local growers to support purchase of locally grown food and nutrition prescriptions. So big win, very exciting. And I'll pass it back to Christine.
So about a month into session, which is a little late for bill filing, two bills were filed that would have required every applicant for SNAP or Medicaid to submit additional documentary proof of their citizenship to access either one of those programs. This additional verification is not necessary. Both programs already have multiple checks to prove if you're a citizen or an eligible immigrant. If you are not in this country legally, you cannot access these programs already. So this additional paperwork would have caused so much red tape, so many headaches for the department, and most likely would have cut off thousands of eligible Missouri citizens from these much needed benefit programs. These two bills were horrible. And I am grateful to say that because of a lot of the partners on this call, we worked very diligently and were able to stop both of these bills from passing. Feeding Missouri, Kids Win Missouri, the International Institute, they all stepped up and met with a lot of legislators to talk about how bad these bills would be for vulnerable Missourians. So they moved quickly. I'm not saying that we stopped them right away, right? So they moved very quickly through the legislative process. The House bill passed through the entire House of Representatives and made it all the way to the Senate side. It was in the Senate committee where we were able to have really good bipartisan support from the committee members themselves. So I want to shout out to both Senator Tracy McCreary, who's a Democrat, Senator Mary Elizabeth Coleman, who is a Republican. They both spoke up on the committee, in the committee out loud to that House member who is the sponsor, and said that they did not see any way that these bills could move forward in this chamber and that there was no path forward to how they were written. So I'm really grateful for the outspoken nature that both of them shared on the committee floor. That being said, I think these bills have a chance of coming back. So at the end of that committee, Representative Gregg said that he still believes this is very good policy and he plans on refiling the bill next year. So that just means we have a lot of work cut out for us next year. We will be doing a lot of meetings with legislators, specifically with Representative Gregg, to try to convince them that these bills are not good policy. But we were able to stop them this session, which was a great win for Missouri. And then just a few other things that we had talked about at the beginning of session that we were following and kind of pushing that did not make it through the entire process. Extending and increasing the donated food tax credit for donations to food pantries, expanding access to school meals, eliminating sales tax on groceries, and then one we've been working on for many, many years is opting Missouri out of that lifetime ban on SNAP. For those who have been convicted of a drug-related felony. So these bills, again, did not make it through, but we will regroup and keeping at it and moving on to 2027 to see if we can have success next year.
Great. Thanks, Christine. Thanks, Amanda. All right, next we're going to talk about some of the bills focused on community justice that passed and didn't pass. Turning it over to Gwen Smith-Moore and Rika White, our two excellent community justice policy managers. Rika, I believe you are up first, so I'll pass it off to you.
Thank you, Lucas. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rika White. I am one of the two criminal justice policy managers with Empower Missouri. I have some very exciting news, and I hope we all can celebrate on this virtual call. That clean slate did pass this session. So after 4 long years of hard work with the passage of Senate Bill 1421, the Missouri legislator finally truly agreed and finally passed clean slate, which is automated record sealing. Now, this one is for drug offenses only, but it will now be heading to the governor's desk, which is so exciting. So I would like to see a lot of you all drop emojis in the chats to help me celebrate this win. This win is so big because, like I said, it's just been 4 years of heartbreak, 4 years of sacrifice, 4 years of just, tenacity to keep going year after year. So I'm really excited, and I hope you all are excited too, because this is going to impact about 200,000 plus Missourians. And it will create opportunities for them to reduce barriers to jobs, housing, education, healthcare, and so much more. So like, this is just a really big win, and I'm really excited about it. I want to shout out a couple of our sponsors who really worked very hard: Rep. Bishop Davidson, Representative Marlene Terry, Senator Brian Williams, and Senator Nick Schroer, who are our sponsors for this session and for Clean Slate. And I just want to thank all the amazing advocates. I can't see everyone on here because the screen is sharing, but I am thanking you if you're on here. Thank you to all of our advocates who showed up and submitted testimony. Thank you to all of our advocates who, came to Day of Action, came to, legislator meetings, just kept pushing with us, sharing our social media toolkits all across the board to show that Missouri can be in the 14th state to implement Clean Slate. And so I really do appreciate that. I also want to also thank our directly impacted individuals in our communities who are really impacted by this bill alone, and know that your voice has been heard finally. And I'm just glad that you can finally see a win from this, because like Christine said, a lot of our work is pushing defense. So this is an amazing win, and I'm hopeful that for years to come that we can expand it a little bit more. Now, while it isn't fully everything we wanted, it's still a major step forward in Missouri, and we have the commitment of our sponsors to keep fighting next session to expand Clean Slate legislation for automated record sealing of all nonviolent offenses. So that is very promising. And yes, I'm very excited. And like I said, this also a big thing I skipped over. I'm sorry. I'm so excited. It's going to be implemented sooner than we ever thought possible as well. January 2027, which is only like a couple months away. I mean, we're already in the end of May, so this is really exciting, and I just can't wait to see the 200,000 plus Missourians' lives be impacted by this win. So thank you for that, and I will turn it over to my colleague, Gwen. I know she's actually Gwen, are you here? I'm sorry.
Across okay?
We can hear you now, Gwen. Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks all. I am joining from a conference and the internet is a little spotty. I will go off camera if needed. So just let me know if I'm coming across like a robot. Big sentencing bill that we wanted to make sure that we covered in depth with you all today. That is going to make a lot of changes, mostly, unfortunately, for the worse. Senate Bill 888, and then the companion bill in House was House Bill 2637. The Senate bill sponsor was Senator Nick Schroer, and the House bill sponsor, Representative John Black. This bill is a priority from the governor. And so we saw Senate Bill 888 get kind of rushed through the final stages of committee to meet this very arbitrary deadline they had of getting it to the governor's desk before spring break. In doing so, they made a technical error that needed to be amended on the House side. And that's why House Bill 2637 was the one that we'll ultimately see be enacted into law, because it has the technical fix there. These bills, as many criminal justice things in Missouri happen, all got put together in a big omnibus bill, but they did start out as, there were some sentencing bills that were moving, and then there were some separate youth justice, like youth certification bills moving, and those all got combined here. The upshot of all of this is that it had a very large fiscal note. The fiscal note stated that a new prison would be needed to be built with the passage of these bills. That will cost the state upwards of $870 million. I'm sure everyone on this call can think of a lot of places that they would rather see our state invest $870 million than a new place to warehouse folks. These bills make sweeping changes to our sentencing structure, but the main takeaway is that on average, people are going to be serving longer sentences across the board. Go on to the next slide, please. So a couple of the specifics here, they are not retroactive. So this is only going to apply to people that are newly sentenced going forward. So not to folks that are currently incarcerated. The bill mandates certain minimum percentages that need to be served before parole eligibility for each felony class. So when you hear, mandatory minimums, this is kind of like a classic mandatory minimum bill. For Class B felons, the most serious felony offense type, that is 70% of a sentence that needs to be served before becoming eligible for parole. For Class B felonies, 50%, and then it goes down from there. There's a couple other changes made to the sentencing structure, including that right now, when somebody reaches 70 years of age, they have kind of a different set of qualifications that takes that advanced age and reduced risk to community into effect. And offers earlier parole eligibility for most cases. This removes that. And so there's no kind of age differences for parole eligibility. It also removes conditional release for Class A and B felonies and for certain other offenses. Conditional release is it's a little bit confusing, but it kind of acts as like a backup to parole. You have your date that you're eligible for parole. You have a final sentence date that, the DOC has to let you back into the community when you've served 100% of your sentence. And then somewhere in between those two dates is your conditional release date. That again kind of serves as a backup. If someone is not being granted parole, they at least have to be let out by their CR date if there's not other kind of behavioral issues that would keep someone to their final kind of maxed out date. So we think that also will drive up the prison population with CR being removed for certain felony classes. Can go on to the next slide. And as I mentioned, the other kind of big part of these bills is around the treatment of youth by the courts. These bills will increase the involvement that prosecutors have in the youth certification process. For kids that have been charged with certain offenses or that have been charged with 3 distinct felonies within a 6-month period. It involves the prosecutor kind of in those certification decisions, which anyone not familiar with that term, certification just means that instead of being processed in a juvenile court, you are treated as an adult by the courts, and that carries adult penalties of Department of Corrections incarceration in an adult prison. It would also create a juvenile criminal history database for the first time in Missouri, that all of that info would be in one spot for law enforcement and courts to access, which advocates had many concerns about. Thankfully, the one blessing here is that it will be closed records, and so those records should not be accessible after an individual has kind of aged out of the juvenile system. We'll also allow a 1% sales tax to be imposed by counties for the purpose of funding youth detention centers. And then it rolls back legislation that was passed last year that banned the use of leg restraints on kids in court. Now leg restraints would be able to be used for Class A and Class B felonies. And then there's a couple other ways that prosecutor involvement has kind of increased, juvenile officers working more closely with prosecutors, et cetera. So we definitely think that this bill will have the unfortunate impact of more young people in our prisons. You can move to the next slide. We've sandwiched the 2 really exciting pieces and covered, this not so great piece in the middle. Yeah.
Before you go on, Gwen, you might want to go off camera. You got a little bit robotic at the end. We can still hear you.
Great, thank you. Hopefully
Yeah.
this is coming across better.
Sounds great.
Okay, great. Okay, so ending on a more positive note, we are really excited to announce that House Bill 1781, omnibus kind of election bill, included voting rights restoration. Actually, yes, the original bill number was 2592, sponsored by Representative Melanie Stinnett. She has been an amazing champion for this issue since her freshman year. When she, was originally campaigning, she spoke to a constituent that wasn't able to vote. And he was pretty, he let her know his opinions about it, and that really stuck with her all the way through to the passage of this bill. So big thanks. I see Denise Lieberman with the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition is on the call. Denise worked tirelessly on this bill. Thank you so much for everything you've done. So voting rights restoration, in a nutshell, means that people on supervision, probation, or parole will be able to vote. So as soon as they come home from prison, or in the case of somebody on probation, they would never lose their right to vote there, with the exception of certain carve-outs, violent and sex felonies specifically. And the quick math that we've done on this, there's about 50,000 people on supervision in Missouri. And so, barring those violent and sex offenses, we think that about 40,000 individuals are going to be impacted. And especially the national climate that we're in now around voting, that is just such a huge win, that 40,000 more Missourians will be getting their right to vote back. We are very excited about that and excited to share that celebratory news with you today. I will turn it over to Rika for the.
Thank you, Gwen. Yes, I see a lot of celebratory emojis, and like Gwen said, echoing shout out to Denise Lieberman, who's with Missouri Voter Protection Coalition. So some of our policy priorities to watch in 2027 is Department of Corrections oversight. This session, we had Senate Bill 1509 and House Bill 1616 and House Bill 2832 by some of our sponsors who worked on oversight. And we had hearings in both chambers with powerful testimony. However, they did not go anywhere past that. I do want to highlight a special medical hearing early in the session that really had me reflect about what we can work on going forward as far as medical neglect inside of our Missouri State prisons. So we had a medical hearing. Centurion is the medical provider for Missouri Department of Corrections, and it was not open for public comment. However, ML Smith, which is the founder of Missouri Justice Coalition, and myself at Empower Missouri were both selected to speak outside for the Missouri, outside of the Missouri Department of Corrections. But this was just a great way that really kind of opened and shed light to what's actually happening day to day. And like I said, the hearings did not go anywhere, but I am hopeful that with the, new legislative session, we'll be prepping a strong start for conversations with new lawmakers around the need for Department of Corrections oversight. Because like I said, these issues are not going away. Every week, every day, I'm seeing someone else either, pass away inside of the prisons or have some type of medical neglect issue or some other even worse issues that are happening inside there. So there is a strong need for Department of Corrections oversight within Missouri. And I am hopeful that that could be a big policy priority to watch in 2027 with our governor. Thank you. And Gwen, if you're available to speak about youth justice.
Yes, thank you, Rika. Youth justice is an area that we are continuing to get organized around and connect with folks. The conference that I'm calling interim is actually Missouri's Juvenile Justice Association's annual conference. So if anyone on the call happens to be here, please come find me. I would love to connect. We do have a working group around youth justice that will be starting to meet again in June. So if this is an area that you're interested in plugging in more on, or if you have a lot to share when it comes to youth justice, please reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you. Similarly, we are working on the issue of automated court reminders. And if this is something that you have any kind of stake in, I would love to connect with you. This is not necessarily going to look like legislation in the 2027 session. We're working on some pilot projects in municipalities and in special treatment courts to try to expand their use of automated court reminders in order to reduce missed court appearances, in turn, reduce jail incarceration, and hopefully make a case to our entire state that with a more robust court reminder system, we would have better outcomes for everybody. So again, if you're interested in any of these areas, oversight, youth justice, court reminders, please connect with Rika and I. Please join our coalition calls if you're interested in learning more. And thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you, Gwen. Thank you, Rika. Gosh, before we move on to housing, I just want to just go back and highlight those two huge wins there that we heard. Clean slate after years of pressure. We're finally going to get automated record clearance in Missouri, and what a huge win that is. And like Gwen said, in the national climate, Missouri is a state that's expanding and did expand voting rights for about 40,000 people. Who are going to get their voting rights restored and be able to vote in upcoming elections. And that is just, I think, important to celebrate progress when progress is made. And those are two huge pieces of progress that came out of this legislative session. All right, well, we've got our final key priority area, which is housing. So I will turn it over to Erica Robbins, our Affordable Housing Policy Manager, to take us through what happened in housing. Erica?
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Lucas. And yes, a really, really good job to all of our policy managers for the work done this year. We did have a wonderful legislative session, and we're thankful to each and every one of you as well for your support in the various coalitions and helping us in all that we've accomplished together. We had a wonderful day of action at the Capitol in February. Our housing team showed up with over 400 tenants, advocates, and organizations, and we spent the day networking, building relationships with one another, making connections, and really establishing rapport that's going to continue to lead us forward. With the meetings with our legislators and representatives and elected officials, we continued empowering each other to mobilize, to advocate, and to organize across all 101 counties in Missouri. And we are super excited about the affordable housing bills that also passed this session. A quote by Robin Wall Kimmerer really encapsulates the overall work that we do within our three coalitions. So I'd like to share it with you. She says, "Gratitude is so much more than a polite thank you. It is the thread that connects us in a deep relationship, simultaneously physical and spiritual, as our bodies are fed and spirits nourished by the sense of belonging, which is the most vital of foods." So as we wrap up with our housing policy updates, let's remember our collective gratitude for each other and our collaborative efforts to empower Missouri. Next slide, please. All right, so we are very excited to announce that we also had two housing priority bills passed this session. Senate Bill 973, sponsored by Senator Curtis Trent, was truly agreed to and finally passed on the very last day of session, Friday, May 15th. So we were waiting, biting our nails in anticipation for that to come through. So it is now on its way to the governor's desk to be signed into law. And we're super excited about Senate Bill 973. It is another omnibus bill, as we've mentioned before, that carries many pieces of legislation with it, along with land bank legislation. And this will allow more communities to establish land banks in their regions and will add to the affordable housing policy landscape that we have here in Missouri. Land banks really are an essential tool in revitalizing and maintaining affordable housing throughout our state and will help provide economic boosts to communities through increasing their property values, helping with the collection of delinquent taxes, and then, of course, job growth by attracting new residents to those areas. And land banks also allow community members to be the decision makers when it comes to maybe an unattended area of their town, and it allows them to keep property rights and choices on what's best for each neighborhood at their own local level. Land banks also allow abandoned properties to be purchased, rehabilitated, and returned back to productive use, making all of those areas in town more attractive and transforming neighborhoods into areas of growth and development. So we are super excited to have this land bank legislation move through. Similar improvements to land bank rules were passed in 2024, but thrown out in a court decision due to a single subject matter violation. So we're incredibly thankful to see the land bank language involved in Senate Bill 973 this year and have it passed. 973 also includes the Missouri Residential Sale Leaseback Protection Act. And what this does is it regulates all third-party transactions where a seller sells their property to another party, and then as a condition of the sale, they are able to enter into a lease or rental agreement to remain in or reoccupy the property. So a huge, huge win for affordable housing policy in Senate Bill 973. And then another housing bill that passed this session, we are happy to report that House Bill 2474, sponsored by Representative John Voss, also passed out of committee. And it allows political subdivisions to implement what's being called a progressive design build contract when going through their construction bidding processes. And this implements a 3-stage qualifications-based selection process between that local government and the design builder to furnish the architectural, engineering, and related design services, related to the project. So Senate Bill 973, House Bill 2474 are both huge wins for affordable housing policy work in Missouri, as we know that these alternative housing options really are an essential piece to the overall affordable housing puzzle. Next slide, please. This year, we did see many, many affordable housing policy bills introduced, and several moved through both the House and the Senate further than we have seen in past years, but stalled in committee and weren't quite able to make it across the finish line in time. So several bills that stalled this session. We had Senate Bill 920, sponsored by Senator Joe Nicola, and Senate Bill 1001, sponsored by Senator Adam Schnelting, both limiting corporate ownership stall. They made it through about midway session, stalled in March. And what these bills do is modify what can be considered as a vacation home and what properties should be deemed residential. So very important legislation. We will also be making sure that we are focused on next year as well. Two other bills that stalled this session, House Bill 1716, sponsored by Representative Greg Sharp, and Senate Bill 1105, sponsored by Senator Jason Bean, support rural workforce housing. This is a logical investment in housing opportunities that Missouri is making in the rural areas of our state. And we were excited to see all of the calls to action that were filled out by those of you when we put them out all throughout the legislative session this year. And we want to thank those of you who raised your voices, let our elected officials know why workforce housing is so important, and especially why an investment in rural areas in our state is very, very essential. House Bill 2384, sponsored by Representative Mike Jones, and House Bill 3230, sponsored by Representative Bill Hardwick, are bills that address zoning and building regulations. Both saw bipartisan support this year, with co-sponsors on both sides helping move them forward. And then finally, House Bill 2399 and House Bill 2722. 2399 is sponsored by Representative Marty Jo Murray and 2722 by Representative Melissa Douglas. Both address the homelessness prevention and protection work that we are doing here at Empower Missouri. House Bill 2399 establishes a Bill of Rights for the unhoused, and House Bill 2722 creates a liaison for individuals who are experiencing homelessness who are moving through the public school system. So another support for our youth to help them become the best adults that they can be, and really a solid sign of showing how Housing First is a proven method for helping individuals find a sustainable place to live and call home. Next slide, please. Okay, very exciting news. This year, House Bill 2830, sponsored by Representative Kimberly Ann Collins, passed unanimously out of committee for the first time since it was established in 1994. And this piece of legislation is incredibly important to us here at Empower Missouri, as we did help establish the Missouri Housing Trust Fund in 1994 and have been advocating ever since then for the funding mechanism to be increased. And so this year, House Bill 2830 did receive bipartisan support, and a Republican filed companion bill also. Representative John Black filed House Bill 2599 as a companion bill to Representative Kimberly Ann Collins, both as solid pieces of legislation for investing in Missouri's housing. The Missouri Housing Trust Fund supports construction, rehabilitation, and homelessness prevention services without increasing taxes nor using general revenue. And it's the only statewide source of funds that Missouri has available. So again, a very, very, very important piece of legislation to see move so far this year. And we know that the momentum will continue in this next legislative session. We're so thankful to our Affordable Housing Coalition members who helped us get House Bill 2830 so far across the floor. We had many members help us write testimony, show up at the Capitol to speak in person, meet with their elected officials, and send countless thank you notes, emails, and text messages. So we would like to acknowledge work from our advocates who helped with House Bill 2830, including Mary Clark with Love Columbia. I saw them on the call earlier today. We want to thank her for coming all the way to Jefferson City to deliver a very, very, very powerful piece of testimony about a father who Love Columbia was able to help with funds from the Missouri Housing Trust Fund and the success that he's seen since then. So we want to thank her sticking it out with us till I think 6 p.m. even that night to deliver that testimony, as well as Susan Cook from River City Habitat for Humanity, who is there, Jonathan Belcher with Peter and Paul Community Services out of St. Louis, Missouri. And then we also received written testimony from Michelle Woods at Habitat for Humanity, and she was able to rally her base in and around St. Charles County to also have legislative meetings in her hometown. And then Akia Howard with Nurture KC also submitted very powerful testimony about how some clients of their organization, mothers and their children, have also been helped with funds. So we want to acknowledge and thank you for elevating your voices. It really does show why our work and advocating for affordable housing in Missouri is fruitful now and will be for generations to come. Next slide, please. Okay, so while we are only a few days out of this year's legislative session, it just ended last week, we're already gearing up and making plans for what's to come in 2027. And of course, we're going to continue working to increase the Missouri Housing Trust Fund as a top priority, and we are definitely going to celebrate that win when it comes. So much of our affordable housing policy work, of course, focuses on advocating for the creation of new homes, rehabilitating those that need a little bit of help. And we also diligently strive to protect individuals who are unhoused or could possibly be at risk of becoming homeless. In the upcoming legislative session, we will continue advocating for tenant rights and protections and oppose any legislation that attempts to criminalize homelessness. A new housing priority that we will be supporting in 2027 is the creation of alternative housing options, including accessory dwelling units, commonly known as ADUs, advocating for build by right laws, less restrictive zoning and building regulations, and of course, the continued expansion of land banks across rural and urban Missouri. And we know that our work is a collective effort, and we want to elevate each and every one of you, as well as those most impacted by our work. Individuals with lived experience are exactly why we do what we do and why Empower Missouri exists. And we strive each day to encourage one another to continue working toward our shared goal of making Missouri the best state that it can be for everyone who lives here. So again, we are very thankful to all of you and the shared mission that we are on together, and grateful for you helping us make 2026 such a wonderful legislative session. And with that, I will turn it back over to Lucas, who will wrap us up for the day.
Thanks, Erica. I just saw one question in the chat just to confirm, and I think that last slide did. Increased funding for the Missouri Housing Trust Fund did not pass this session. It did go the furthest it ever has gone, passing unanimously out of the committee, and had really great bipartisan support. But that is an issue we're looking towards in 2027 because that funding increase is needed. I saw some great chats about maybe some TANF that hasn't gone up since 1991, and certainly the funding for Missouri Housing Trust Fund hasn't gone up for 1994. So the increase is really needed. Did not happen in 2026. Is a priority for us in 2027, and thankful for all the support we got. And if you're interested in learning how you can help, please reach out to Erica or myself. Happy to have more folks talking about the importance of funding homeless prevention services, construction, rehab, services that really help in fill a need in the state for affordable housing and homelessness prevention. All right, I am going to close this out real quickly on one slide on other policy issues. I did in particularly wanted to talk about House Bill 2596 and give a hearty congratulations and thank you to the Beacon Reproductive Health Network, who has carried this issue for a couple of years now, got a win last year, got an even bigger win this year. House Bill 2596 included a provision which now allows Missourians with private health insurance to get a full month's worth of contraception at one time. And so this rule had existed, did exist and continues to exist in Medicaid. What this provision in House Bill 2596 did was now require private health insurance to do this. And this obviously reduces barriers, particularly in rural areas where getting to a pharmacy is not as easy, going back and forth every month, every 3 months, every 6 months, whatever you could get. This now allows folks who want to get their full 12 months prescription filled at once. And I don't know, pharmacies are, I think anywhere you live, it can be hard to get to the pharmacy. I will just say from personal experience, even if they're close by, finding the time that they're open can be hard. So that's a huge win. Congrats to Beacon Reproductive Health on their efforts. That really was one of those, I think maybe the last week victories as well. So a lot of things got done in the final weeks of session. Amanda mentioned the food is medicine part of the healthcare omnibus bill. That bill, I think, Amanda, you might know off the top of my head, I think it's 150, 160 plus pages. There's a lot in that bill. I did also want to mention, as we were talking about Medicaid, that did include Medicaid coverage for doula services as well. So there's a lot in there, but as far as some healthcare issues as well, I wanted to highlight that doula services were included along with the food as medicine provision in that healthcare omnibus bill. So let's turn our last 5 minutes to talk a little bit about what's next, how else you can join up with Empower Missouri, with continuing the theme of gratitude for all that we've done collectively to get these victories. If your organization is interested in taking the next step and really beefing up your advocacy skills, Empower Missouri for a few years now has run this Advocacy Accelerator program run by our Director of Advocacy, Sarah Owsley, who has the backbones of a lot of these victories, a lot of prior victories in the legislative session. And so if your organization is interested in learning more about how, expanding your skills, how to operate in the Capitol locally, how to deal with messaging, what nonprofits are allowed to do, this is really focused on direct service organizations who we think are the backbone of any advocacy organization that's going to make progress for everyday Missourians. It's the nonprofits and organizations that many of you all work for on a day-to-day basis, meeting with people, addressing their housing needs, providing them food, providing them case management, providing support for them. This program really is designed for those organizations who want to take the next step in continuing to beef up not just what they do day-to-day in direct service, but how they can impact advocacy and systems changes. The form on the website can help you reach out to Sarah. But I really encourage all these victories, as you heard, didn't happen in a vacuum. Certainly didn't happen just because Empower Missouri showed up at the Capitol. It happened because advocates learned, trained, pushed, fought together, and continued to persist. And so please sign up your own organization, share it with friends or colleagues who are interested in expanding skills to do more advocacy, and I guess accelerate their advocacy, as the name suggests. Last but not least, we went through, I think, 57 minutes of a Empower Missouri 2026 presentation without mentioning we are celebrating 125 years of people-powered policy change. And so if you haven't heard, this is our 125th anniversary, which means that our Anti-Poverty Advocates Summit, which is always a must-attend event, is especially a must-attend event for October for this year. So please join us October 1st and 2nd in Columbia for our Anti-Poverty Advocates Summit. Save that date. Registration coming very soon. And if you have a interest in a session, in running a session, I will link the breakout speaker form. If you've got a breakout, which are always really worthwhile. If you've got a program or advocacy, or if you've gone to a recent speaker or conference where you're like, oh, we want to spread that message in Missouri, that's a great program, that's a great advocacy technique, that's a great policy, please fill out the breakout form application form, and hope to see many of you in Columbia on October 1st and 2nd. Last but not least, I will say if you enjoyed 60 minutes of us talking about, of me talking about advocacy, I encourage you to partner with us to do some ballot initiative education session, particularly if you're located in Southern Missouri. As I mentioned, this tax scheme, tax on everything scheme ballot initiative is going to be one of the more important votes we have. Love to partner with you to bring education to your areas. And finally, I have to give a plug for TikTok. I did a 90-second version of this 60-minute presentation on TikTok. And so that is not our best TikTok content. I think it's our latest TikTok content, but a lot of fun stuff. Try to do it in a little bit more fun and digestible format. So follow us on TikTok and all the rest of the social media platforms. And I think that's it for our program. So I wish you all the best. Please reach out. I'm going to put my email, as I said, it's on the slide in the chat too. And thanks for all your work this legislative session. Let's have another great one next year, and I hope you have a great summer.